And welcome back. So in that previous video, you saw us complete the majority of the install needed to start prepping for the first start. The item that you see here is a pressure tester slash vacuum fill device for filling up the coolant. Now this particular engine, and this particular make, model, and year, per the instruction manual, wants the system to be pulled under vacuum, and then once it's under vacuum, you hold the vacuum there for a little bit just to verify that you don't have any leaks in the cooling system. And then with the system under vacuum, you use that vacuum to draw coolant into the system. Now, not all vehicles currently do this. A lot of older vehicles, to include a lot of older Chrysler vehicles, have bleed screws located or the water pump that you can crack open to help bleed the system out. This one does not. I do not see a type of vent screw that could be used on the water pump. Now, we'll go look at the old water pump and see if there's something you might be able to get away with, but the manual on this one does explicitly say to put the system under vacuum to do this. It doesn't suggest that you could do it the old school way, which is, fill the coolant bottle up, let the system fill in, let it burp out what it can, start the vehicle, turn the heater on, run the heater core, whole 9 yards, and just kind of go through a couple of cycles that way. And eventually you should get all the air out. One of the critical things on this motor, as you saw us reassemble it, was the EGR cooler assembly, which sits underneath the intake. It is critical that you do not get an air bubble trapped into that EGR cooler. Any air bubble in the system is going to mean that coolant's not going to flow to that area, and it's going to cause it to overheat. And that EGR cooler's case, it could end up being a very bad day if that were to happen, because that EGR cooler could overheat, it could crack. If that were to happen, just to show you here, remember what's sitting right above it, which was an intake, which is made out of plastic. So it could very easily just completely destroy that intake should something happen to that EGR cooler assembly. So with that being said, we went online and picked up this kit that you see here, which is kind of a knockoff of an Astro kit that I saw online while I was researching doing this. And that is the name of the kit, and I'll put a link in the description, but we're going to see in real time if this is going to work. As you can see, the kit here, because again, it's a pressure testing slash vacuum, basically purge and fill kit. So it gives you a wide range of different adapters for different makes and models. And if you don't have an adapter that'll fit, they give you this universal cone, which we may have to use, because I looked over their instructions, and although they do list quite a range of vehicles, as you can see there, I had to go through these caps and kind of find the best one that would at least fit this coolant jug on this, again, 2500, which happened to be the one with the green band you see there in this particular kit. And that happened to be adapter number 12, which according to their instructions is actually for Ford, Monto, an International, Land Rover, an Opel, a Samsung, and I think that's Samsung motor. I can't pronounce most of these. You'll have to forgive me. But it threaded onto the tank. It seemed to seal fine. We'll find out when we go to draw a vacuum. If we can't get it to draw a vacuum, then we'll just resort to using their little universal cone, which again will fit down into that coolant tank up to a point and should allow us to draw a vacuum. So that's always an option. And that's just the original radiator cap that came off the coolant bottle for now. So also, what you're going to see back there in the distance, and we'll cover this in a separate video, but we do now have an air compressor in this garage. It's a requirement for being able to do this vacuum fill kit. And this is just, I don't want to say just a, this is, went to Northern Tool and picked this one up. And this is a North Star, their product brand, which if my research is correct, a lot of individuals are saying that North Star is basically just Ingersoll Rand built compressor. So we've got it up here. We've already went through the break-in period. I won't go into detail on it now, but I'll definitely put a video out there if anybody's interested more in depth. I've got it pressurized at this point. I don't have it plugged back in. And so once it gets down to a certain point, it's not going to kick back in and fill. And I'll explain why. Got it set to about 80 pounds of pressure coming out of our line right now. Because as I was researching this, and I saw quite a few videos online where individuals have gone through this same process, no one would explicitly show the air compressor they were using. And I couldn't really find anything online other than a couple of blurbs that said, you know, when using certain gauges like this, at least a minimum of 80 psi of shop air you have to maintain to it until you get the system down to a particular vacuum that you need. So I wanted to show you that what that one is just a 2 horsepower single stage 20-gallon tank. I thought about maybe trying one of those little pancake air compressors, but I did find at least one occurrence online where the individual said that, yeah, the little pancake air compressor, that's something you would use to drive in nails, or like a little small finishing nails or fill car tires with, more than likely isn't going to cut it for this type of a gauge. So we're going to try that. We're going to see if it unplugged, but with a full tank of air, can supply the supply air needed to get our vacuum down to where we need it in order to start to fill our system. And if it gets down too low and starts to kind of peter out, so to speak, then we'll plug it back in and let the tank refresh itself. But the question is, can it do it with just a single tank of air not plugged in? It should supply us what we need, but again, we'll see. So what we're going to do here is, and the instructions say to get it to about 20 to 25 inch grams of mercury. I found another one that said, you know, just go until the needle stabilizes. And the manual for doing the coolant fill basically just said follow the gauge's instructions. So what I'm going to do is just kind of keep an eyeball on it, but probably when it hits about the -20 on the scale here for the vacuum, I'm just going to close this valve, so to speak. Right now it's in a closed position. Close this valve, so to speak, to stop drawing the vacuum on it, and then we'll let it set and verify that we don't have a leak. And provided that we don't have a leak, then we'll continue on with the fill process, which comes into this bottom hose that you see here, which we have into a nice, clean, never before used 5-gallon bucket that we're going to use to mix our coolant. The coolant that we're going to use for this operation, it is a concentrate. It is the 10-year coolant. You got 2 jugs of it. The nice thing about going with concentrate, or at least in my opinion, is that yes, you need distilled water to mix it, and that's what we have here. Is that 1 gallon of coolant, if you go in with a 50-50 mix, which we will be doing, is going to become 2 gallons of coolant once we're done with mixing. And online, the concentrate per gallon was the same price as the pre-mixed per gallon. And we do have a jug of pre-mixed here, which you can see, which is 50-50 pre-diluted. And this is in case we need more than 4 gallons of coolant. Maybe we just need a little bit to top off, and I don't want to have to mix up an entire gallon just to get a little bit to top off with. So that's why we have at least 1 jug of the pre-mix. I actually have 2 jugs of pre-mix, but I doubt we're going to need quite this much. But I'd like to go through the concentrate first. So that's what we're going to do. We got our coolant on the ready. We got an air compressor on the ready. And the process, from my understanding, is going to be that we're going to hook up shop air here. This smaller diameter line, they suggest that you just put off to the side or you put into a container, because if you're doing this on the system where you may still have some coolant left in the bottle, which On this system, we know it's pretty well drained out completely. But in case you've got any coolant left in that bottle, when you draw the vacuum, it is going to get discharged, or it may come spraying and spurting and sputtering out of this line here. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to hook up shop air here. I'm going to leave this closed, turn this valve on, and then I'm going to slowly just open up this valve here to allow the air to flow across the venturi, which will give us our vacuum effect on this line here, which plugs into the top of our adapter cap and goes into our coolant bottle, as you can see. Once our vacuum gauge, again, gets to that -20, we should start to see our coolant hoses collapse and kind of fold in on themselves, because again, we're drawing a vacuum on the system. Once we get to that point, I'm going to close this valve back off. I'm going to leave our shop air attached. I'm going to shut this valve off, and we're just going to sit here and wait and verify that this doesn't start to bleed down. If this starts to bleed down, then we know we've got a leak in the system somewhere. And if it's capable of leaking air into the system and causing us to lose our vacuum, well, then that would mean it's capable of leaking coolant. So that's going to be our test. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut the camera here. I'm going to get you set up in the tripod that we've kind of got going on here, so hope you get a nice shot of that gauge. And don't worry, I'll get a shop light in here too to help with that. And we're going to hook this up, and we're going to step through this for the first time. This is the first time I've used this kit, let alone done a vacuum, basically purge and fill on a system before. So this should get interesting, and it's going to validate some of our work, at least from the coolant system side of it, and validate for us that we hopefully don't have a leak. I'm going to cut it here, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we got a little bit of vacuum on the system because I was playing with this a little bit off camera just to get a bit more familiar with it. I've got you zoomed in on the gauge. We haven't reached the vacuum that we're looking for yet, but a couple things, and I'll show you this, is I did have to switch over to the universal adapter. That cap just wasn't sealing well enough on the jug, and it was causing some vacuum loss. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the rest of this here. I'm going to turn the air supply on and then close our valve, and just continue to build vacuum here. The compressor might kick in. I did have to kick it up to about 90 psi in air pressure. I may need to go a little higher on the air pressure, because as you can see, it's starting to slack off a bit. I'm going to go crank the air compressor, the PSI up a bit, and I'll bring it right back. Okay, so we let the compressor recover. There we go. Slowly getting a little bit more. My compressor may kick in here again in the next few moments. Slowly getting up to what we need. Okay, one moment. We let our tank recover. I cranked up the pressure a little bit more coming out of the regulator, because again, you got to factor in that we're using a 50-foot hose. Okay, so we're at -20 there. We'll cut the valve, turn the air supply off, and then we're going to sit here for a few minutes and we're going to watch. And we're going to actually, I'll bring you on a tour. Let me cut the video and I'll come back and I'll show you these collapsed radiator hoses and such, just so you can kind of see all that. And then we'll come back and check our vacuum and start our coolant fill. One moment. Okay, so welcome back. So just to show you here, a lot of what I saw in the example videos, you can see that our hoses are indeed collapsed. Even a little bit on our heater block hoses. As you can see, I'm going to come down here and go ahead and start mixing up our first couple of gallons of coolant, and then I'll put you back up on the fender, and then I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So we spent a little bit of time mixing up that first 2 gallons of coolant, which again, it's 1 gallon of concentrate to 1 gallon distilled water. Now, what I'm going to do is actually cut the vacuum on. Again, use the Venturi effect to start to pull our coolant up into our line, just so that any air that we had in our supply line doesn't end up getting back into our system. So I'm going to give that a go. Go ahead and turn shop air back on. Shut that off. Okay, turn that off. Turn that off. Okay, got it. So basically just use that to help get the air out of that line. I know that was not really going to be able to see it, but what I'm going to do now is go ahead and disconnect shop air. Get that hose out of our way. There we go. Tell you what, let me stop this and zoom you out so you can kind of see what I'm doing here with controls. 1 minute. And welcome back. Looks like that's all in frame. So you can see we still got our vacuum. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up our bottom line. So this is our vacuum side's been turned off. Our shop air's been turned off. We're going to leave this off. I'm going to slowly open up our bottom valve here. But I'm also going to keep an eye on the level in our bucket because I don't want to suck any air back in the system. And we're going to continue to add coolant until we're out of vacuum at this point. And here we go. So I'm just down here monitoring this little filter they got in a bucket because I don't want this coolant level, again, like I said, getting low enough to the point that it starts to pull air. I don't know if you can hear that, but you can kind of hear it gurgling as it fills up the system. And you'll see that vacuum, start to decrease. I don't have that supply line opened up, 100% just because I want it to go a bit slow. Tell you what, I think go ahead. Okay, I'm getting a little low in the bucket. I'm going to let it go a little bit further. And I'm going to mix in some more coolant. Okay. It's almost to the bottom of the bucket, but you can see it definitely needs more. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and cut the camera. I'm going to get this coolant mixed and bring you back just so it doesn't, continue to drag on. Bring you back in a bit. And welcome back. Okay, so we got 2 more gallons of coolant mixed up in our bucket. We're just going to continue this procedure. Reopen our valve. I'm keeping pressure on this cone in case you're wondering, because I don't want it to unseat early and lose the rest of what we got. Looks like we're just about there. Okay. And it's still petering in a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the camera at this point. I'll bring you back when it finally reaches 0 here, just so it doesn't end up becoming like a a forever long video here. But I'm going to go ahead and I'll let this finish and I'll bring you back. But that's pretty much the gist of it. Once that finally hits 0 and it draws in the last of the coolant, we'll go ahead and disconnect everything at that point, because we should be good once that's complete. Like I said, we may have to add, a little bit of coolant to the coolant bottle just to kind of top it off. But as far as the system's concerned, that should get it pretty well full of fluid and do a pretty good job for us of getting that any trapped air that could potentially be in the system, out of the system. But that being said, I'll go ahead and cut it and I'll bring you back in a short. Thank you much. And welcome back. So as you can see, we're pretty much at 0 on our vacuum gauge at this point. So we're going to go ahead and disconnect our apparatus here. Before we disconnect anything, I shut this bottom valve off because, again, I don't want anything coming up, any air coming up into this system and going back out. What I'll more than likely do is I'll cut this valve on and I'll disconnect the fitting over there on the coolant bottle. And that should allow air to come back into this tube and flush the remaining coolant in the bucket. Now earlier when it was setting at 5 and kind of wasn't drawing any more in the system, and it made sense and I thought about it, what I ended up having to do was that you can see I got the bucket positioned pretty far down. I ended up just picking the bucket up and resting on the top of the tire, so it was a bit higher than the rest of the system, and then you heard it draw the remaining coolant in until the remaining bit of the vacuum finally went away. So, and as you can see, we're almost right at our minimum line inside of our coolant bottle. You can kind of see it looks like a purplish type coolant. So yeah, and like I said, it looks like it did exactly what it was supposed to do. I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, I'm going to open this valve up. And you can see, the vacuum's gone at this point. I don't know if you saw the coolant drain out. So any air that was in this bottle just kind of, once this seal was broken, air was able to get in, go through here, and you can see kind of flush the remaining of this line out. There we go. Yeah, there it goes. Yeah, you can see some air. Yeah, a little bit of vacuum, it looks like, was still inside that coolant bottle, but that's fine. That's not going to hurt anything. So let's go back and look. You can see our coolant hoses are now kind of back to their normal shape and no longer pancaked in. We can go ahead and get this disconnected, and obviously we'll keep this coolant on hand to kind of top this off. And you can see once we finally got a little bit of air back inside that bottle, we did drop a little bit. So I'm going to top that off to probably between min and max. We'll let it sit there, and of course after everything runs and has a chance to cycle, then we'll check the system from there. But we probably used, I would say, about maybe 3.5 gallons of coolant to fill the system. Now the system wasn't completely empty. There was still some coolant left in the block, in the heater core, and there's a little bit of coolant left in the block. But it did actually eat quite a bit, and this gauge cluster seems to get the job done and work without an issue. I will tell you that the little trick about using the vacuum to pull fluid up into the tube before you disconnect it so you don't get air back in your system. I got that from Watch Wes Work, and I'll put a link in his description. He got it from another fellow YouTuber, which he also will credit, but I'll put the link in there for Watch Wes Work. Now, I did do a little bit of research. Wes had one of these, and he switched out to an OEM Tools one, which on Amazon, I'll put the link to this one where I got an Amazon, but the link to the OEM Tools one that he links is the same price, and in my opinion, it looks to be a little bit better quality of this one. Again, I'm not saying this one didn't get the job done. It clearly did, but the OEM Tools one that he has looks to be a little bit more robust and, you know, a little bit easier as far as learning what to navigate and what valves to turn when you need to turn them. But anyway, that's just it. That was my way of kind of showing how to do it, just to show you that universal cone. I did have to go to the universal cone and use that to seat and draw the vacuum, because the one adapter, I was able to get it to fit, just it would not seal well enough. So I'm going to do that. Let me get all this disconnected. I'm going to get this apparatus rinsed out with some water here, with some distilled water. And then I'll get that topped off, and I'll bring you back. I will, off camera, go ahead and get the oil filter in this vehicle changed out to a new one. I'll show you the oil filters I'm using. They're going to be Wix brand, but they've got an MP part number, just meaning multi-pack, because I think I ordered like 6 or 12 that came in the pack, because it was actually cheaper per filter to order it in a multi-pack. So I will do that, and I'll get that changed out. We're going to add some oil into the system, which again, I'm not going to film. It's just literally adding oil into the system. If I remember correctly, the Hemis take about 7 quarts of oil to get them filled. And then I'll bring you back after we do the PCM update to the brain. And then we'll proceed to see if we can get this bad boy to crank. But I'll bring you back in a bit. Talk later. And welcome back. So as promised, we just got done adding the oil, changing the oil filter, and updating the tune sent to us by our tuner. I didn't show the whole programming piece because you didn't miss much. It's me literally just plugging in the tuner, selecting the tune file, and stepping through the process. Not to mention with today's climate and things getting weird about, you know, vehicle modifications and tunes or whatever. Just, you know, like I said, you didn't miss much, and it's easy enough to look up, you know, what's the process of using a particular tuner on a particular vehicle, because they're all going to be a little bit different. But again, it's been tuned. Obviously, we put our battery back in our truck and woke our patient back up after a very long slumber. Applied our tune, checked our oil, and then I still have to top off the coolant. I will go ahead and take care of that here momentarily. I just wanted to show you because I promised I would. This is the oil filter, the Wix model number that it states that it calls for in the Wix book, which is 57060. Now, I was having trouble finding these individually, again, just due to the part shortages and everything in general. But I was able to go to Amazon and get a 57060 MP. Like we spoke about earlier, MP just means multi-pack. So I was able to score a 12-pack of these filters, and the only difference between this and a non-MP is that, you know, it's single filter will come by itself, and an MP just means multi-pack, meaning I got a box of 12. It's more for individuals who manage fleet vehicles and things of that nature. But since we do our own oil changes here on this vehicle, and will for the very foreseeable future, then it was a good buy to go ahead and scarf up a box of these, because it did make them cheaper per unit. The oil that we're using is the same oil that you've seen us use throughout this process. Let me just grab it here. And that's just the Pennzoil 0W40. Again, it's what the book calls for. It's what I can easily get a hold of. You know, to each their own. If you choose to use something other than Pennzoil in your vehicle, then by all means, using your vehicle what you're comfortable with. This is what the book calls for in ours, so this is why I'm using what I'm using. What we're going to do before we do the first fire up on this, I went ahead and picked up, put this out of a box here for you. Just one of these, forget the camera work because I'm kind of trying to do multiple things here. This is just this flexible aluminum duct you'd use in a dryer. So what I'm going to do, since we're here in the garage, and the first time we go to start this up, it's going to smoke for a little while, because you remember when we were putting the cylinder heads together, we wiped all the cylinder heads down with oil, plus just getting contaminants in there to begin with. Like I said, it's going to smoke for a bit, and since we're in the garage area here, what we're going to do is we're just going to take that flexible ductwork, put it over the tailpipe, and just kind of run it out the garage door, just to try to cut down on some of the smoke as residuals burn off. Now, obviously, there's nothing much we can do here about the front of the engine part. You know, you're going to see some smoking, things of that nature, because we did get oil in places, we did get grease. You know, we were using WD-40 to break away rust, and PB Blaster, and just all that stuff's going to burn off. But like I said, she is ready at this point. We did pull the fuel pump fuse, which you see here. It's a 30 amp fuse, and in this particular fuse box, it is position 71. Again, don't use that as a rule of thumb for your vehicle. Everybody's going to be different. I was able to verify that we did not get fuel pressure when we were programming it, because I did have to turn the vehicle to the on position when it would normally cycle the fuel pump, and the fuel pressure gauge is still reading 0. So we have the correct fuse. What we're going to do is crank on it a little bit until we see oil pressure on the inside of the cab. Once I see oil pressure being picked up by the oil pressure sensor, then we'll come out here, we'll put the fuse in it, we'll key cycle it a few more times to get pressure into the fuel rail. Once we see pressure in the fuel rail, then it should start to, you know, spit and sputter, and, you know, hopefully turn over at that point with no issue. So with that being said, that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to try to get a second GoPro set up. I want to try to get one, maybe using the mount that I'm holding on to you with now, maybe hold it or fix it right here to the front of the engine bay, so you get a nice overview shot of the engine. I'm going to try to get to the second one inside the cab with me, so you can kind of see it key cycle and the oil pressure build up. Like I said, I'm going to top that coolant jug off a bit more, and then we shall get to it. It'll be instantaneous for you, but it's going to be the next day for me. It's getting a little bit late in the evening, and just to be a bit more polite to the neighbors, I don't want to be cranking and cranking and cranking on this thing while they're still trying to do their thing. So first thing tomorrow, once everybody's up and it's late enough in the morning, then we'll crank it up. But like I said, no need to worry. You're not going to have to wait for another video. Like I said, it'll be instantaneous for you. But with that being said, well, sorry, one final note. A couple final notes. My apologies, I'm rambling. As I stated before, if everything runs okay, we're going to bring it up to operating temperature. We're going to let it run for a bit. We're going to shut it down, let it cool, and then we're going to change the oil a second time. That's so that way any contaminants that managed to get in the oil passages that we didn't get cleaned out should then settle to the bottom of the motor. Hopefully some will get, you know, trapped in the filter, and the filter will do its job. And that's why we're going to do the second oil change. Again, just to help eliminate any contaminants or water or things of that nature that might still be, you know, floating around our oil passages for us. And my final verdict, last thing I wanted to touch on, the final verdict on the kit that I got to do the vacuum fill procedure for the coolant. It did work, as you saw. Absolutely no issues with it. Like I said, it was a bit finicky. In my opinion, since the OEM Tools one that Wes Work used looks a lot more stout and a lot more of a professional tool. Like I said, I will link in the description a link to his video where you can get his Amazon link to that kit I'll also put in the description a link to the kit I bought. Like I said, it does work, but I do like the look of the OEM Tools one better. As far as the compressor, if you remember earlier, just wanted to highlight this a bit more because it's been kind of the one thing I've seen lacking in a lot of these videos where individuals have done this, is that, yeah, pancake compressor definitely would not have been able to push the volume needed to get sufficient vacuum in that tool, just based on what I can see from using it. That compressor you see there is, like I said, it's 2 horsepower electric, single stage, 20 gallon North Star. And you can look at, I'll find a link to it and put it in the description as well so you can look at the specs. Now that one did do it. Now, as you saw earlier when we were doing this, it did struggle with it. So I ended up running the final pressure at about 100 psi going to that apparatus. And as you heard in the video, it did have to fill that compressor up about 3 times for it to finally get it to that negative 25 on that scale. So again, hopefully it helps, but if you're going to get one of these 20-gallon tank compressors, is able to drive it, but just be mindful that it's going to work at it a little bit versus maybe something that's a larger tank that would have a higher CFM at that particular pressure, would have an easier job of it. So with that being said, when we come back, I'll show you how we're going to get that positioned. Again, it's just going to hang on the tailpipe, go out the garage door, and hopefully we'll get some oil pressure and then some fuel pressure. And then we'll give this thing a crank. It'll either work or spectacularly explode. One of the two. Either way, it'll make for some interesting footage. And I'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. One of the things I wanted to kind of show you, I saw this in Reignited's video, is that if you have a scan tool and can do things like verify and just run a system scan and verify that everything looks good prior to starting the vehicle, because when you turn the key on, it'll initialize some systems and kind of go out there and do checks for various sensors and such. So one of the things I wanted to do, and we added another new tool to this channel to kind of help us with our progress and vehicle modifications going forward, is the launch scan tool that you see here. So I got you zoomed in on this tool at this point, and what I'm going to do, and I already had the key and ignition and the dongle plugged into the truck, and I'll do another video on this here in a bit, or a separate video on the scan tool itself, but I'm going to select a 16-pin connector, tell it I want to do an automatic search, and it should go out there and identify with the truck and find the VIN number, which as you can see here it did. And it does see the 2016 Ram 2500, which is good. And what I want to do is I'm going to run a health report, and it's going to go through and scan these particular modules. Now, in all fairness, I did this a bit earlier when I was checking this tablet out, and I did find one issue, albeit minor, and I'll show you what I mean once it gets done scanning all the modules here. Okay, on right here, what had happened is that you'll see hood ajar input circuit open, and I'm going to show this to you. What had happened was I left that connector unplugged. Now, it won't stop us from starting the vehicle, but it will stop things like remote start from working. The rest of the codes you see here are all in stored status, with the exception of one item in the radio. I'm not really concerned about the radio at this point in time, but stored, normal. Okay, so didn't find any area codes in these modules, but I want to show you what this is going to do. I'm going to go back into the body control module, and I'm going to go unplug this hood latch connector. kind of show you what it does. Right now you'll see that it's stored. But if I go into that module with that connector unplugged, what it's going to see now in set is an active code. And we want to read fault codes, DTC information, and you can see that we got an active code for a hood ajar input circuit open. Now we can do a code search from here and it'll bring you to the kind of the web and help you with some diagnostic tips. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up one. I'm going to plug that sensor or that hood latch connector back in, relock it in place. And now if I look at the DTC codes in there, you see now that it says stored. So it knows that we plugged that connector back in. Again, it was minor. It wasn't something like missing cam position, sensor, anything of that nature, at least not yet. But just to give you an idea that if you got access to some kind of scan tool, when you first turn that key on, you can do a quick scan like this and just verify that, what it's seeing, what it's not seeing. So I'm going to go back out of this. So what I'm going to do next is I've cranked the engine over a couple of times to see if we can get some oil pressure into the system. I'm going to do that a few more times. I'm going to go ahead and shut things down. I'm then going to put the fuel pump fuse back in, allow it to build some fuel pressure, and then we'll see if we can get things started. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and cut this video, and when I get things ready to go, I'll get a tripod set up pointing at the front of the engine. I'll start a recording from there, and then we'll see what we get, and I'll talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So I got you in a tripod at this point with a shot of the engine. We put our fuel pump fuse in and we cycled it, and we do have fuel pressure per our sensor in the cab. I'm not seeing any fuel leaks on the fittings. They look good. I did spin off the oil filter as added precaution and just replace it with yet another new one. I spun the old one off. I just wanted to verify that I was seeing some oil starting to get to the filter through our key cycles. So I do see that. So it appears that the oil pump is starting to prime. I've key cycled it several times, but it hasn't got to the point of showing me oil pressure on the dash gauge or on the scan tool, and that may be because I'm not sure if that PID just it may still require a bit higher revolution to get that new oil pump to prime, because if you remember, we added a new oil pump to the system. So I'm going to go ahead and start it at this point, or attempt to start it at this point, but I'm going to keep an eyeball on it. But again, I did take that oil filter loose, and I started to see new oil make its way into that filter. So that tells me that it is starting to get itself primed up. Like I said, we got fuel pressure at this point. We've got our flexi hose on our exhaust headed out the back of the garage. I'll actually just take you with me and show you that real quick. So you can kind of see we've got our flexi hose here to help take some of our exhaust fumes out and push them out the door, as well as we're going to obviously leave the garage door open during this process. I also do not see, like I said, any fuel or anything else leaking out of the engine thus far. And in case we need it, and hopefully we don't, but in case we do, we've got an automotive grade fire extinguisher here. So what this is more like a CO2 type fire extinguisher and not like a powder based one. So something should happen, we've got that on the ready, and I've got additional fire extinguishers kind of posted around everywhere. So let me put you back on your perch. Make sure that you're going to stay up there through all of this. And now that we got fuel pressure, I'm going to go ahead and start it. And if it starts and does crank over, I'm going to keep my eyeball on the oil pressure, and hopefully we should see some decent amount of oil pressure here creep up shortly. And here we go. We have currently about 73 pounds of oil pressure. So it's still getting warmed up, but if you remember, we're running a Hellcat oil pump in here instead of the normal oil pump. So just to show that to you, so it did have to run a couple of seconds with the higher RPMs before we finally got oil pressure. But as you can see, we do have oil pressure. We've come down into idle. And so far, no dings. Battery voltage is charging. Coolant temperature is coming up. Still 73 pounds of oil pressure. Hopefully, let me see if I can get you in there closer to see that. Okay. See if I can get you attached to the steering wheel here. You can see on our other gauges, sorry for the camera work here guys, I apologize. You can see we got 14.2 volts battery voltage, we got 61 pounds of fuel pressure, and we got negative 20, so we got a negative 20 vacuum on our manifold right now, which would make sense because we're not running under boost currently. And we're gonna let this run, we're gonna let it get up to operating temperature, and then I'll bring you back. Thank you much. So hopefully you can hear, sorry for the noise, engine's obviously running. You can see we're up to operating temperature at this point. I've heard the cooling fans come on. Oil pressure, now that it's warmed up, is down to 51 psi. So far I'm not finding any oil leaks underneath the vehicle. We are getting some smoke on the driver's side, but that's just residual stuff that's burning off of the exhaust, which should clear itself up after a couple of run cycles. And let's go back and take a look at the exhausts. You can see that we're blowing clean, which is good. I'm just gonna, this is not very hot, but just to show you, no smoke, a little bit of water coming out of the exhaust, but that's just condensation, that's normal. So we're not running any kind of blue smoke, or doesn't look like any oil burning, nor does it look like any coolant's burning, so that's good. We're gonna put our ductwork back on. Okay, yep, so we're right even where we normally run for operating temperature. I heard the electric cooling fan kick on a moment ago. So I'm gonna let this run a little bit longer, and then I'll bring it back. But the good news is I'm not seeing any leaks, and we're not seeing any check engine codes. And once this is done, we'll power it down, but we'll leave the key on, and then we'll come in here and run a scan on the scan tool, which we'll cut into the next part of this video, and just make sure there's not any codes lingering in there that may not necessarily trip a check engine light. But you may be able to hear it. You may not be able to hear it just because the engine's so loud, but the lifters are ticking a little bit, and that's perfectly normal. It's going to take them a couple of cycles to get completely pumped up with oil. But like I said, we'll shut it down, we'll run a scan. Once it cools down, then we'll do another oil change on it.
And then we'll finish up those small items like putting in the fender wells and such, but I'm not going to video that because that's just putting the fender wells and such back in. I'll come out with another video that shows some other upgrades that we have planned for this truck. But I'm going to go ahead and cut it, let it run for a little bit while longer, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. Sorry about that, and welcome back. So we just got up to operating temperature. We let it run for about another 2 to 3 minutes, and we went ahead and shut it down. At this point, again, we're going to let it cool down, and then we're going to do another oil change on it. And again, the reason why we're doing that second oil change is to catch any contaminants that, now that oil is circulating through the system, you know, that might end up in the oil pan, just to go ahead and, you know, flush that out. We did add, you know, new lifters and a new cam, things of that nature. But now that it's ran and got up to operating temperature, we're going to go back into our scan tool. Go ahead and do another auto search. Found our vehicle again. Do another health report. Key is still in the on position. Okay, looks like we got some lean codes in here. It may just take some time to get itself worked out. We'll have to run it through a couple of drive cycles. Fuel system 1.1 lean and 2.1 lean. And it could also be our tune as well, so I'll let the tuner know that we're getting lean codes on both our banks. Stored. Yeah, everything else is stored. So everything else is normal. Everything else is coming up as stored. But other than P0171 and the P0174, fuel system 1.1 lean and 2.1 lean, which are currently pending. So they haven't set the check engine light yet, but if they continue, they will. So what we can do is, once it cools down and goes, we can try it now. I'll tell you what, once it cools down and we do the second oil change on it, then I'll make it a separate video. But for now, it does start its run. What we'll do is we'll come back and we'll graph out the oxygen sensors here and see what it's referring to, because it's complaining about both banks. So it's possible that we could have damaged some oxygen sensors when we had that playing around with that pipe the way that we were. It could also just be, again, that it's a new tune. It hasn't been driven. It hasn't had, you know, basically any run time on it, so we may just need to get it out and drive it. So let's see here. What can we do? We should be able to read those. Yeah, there's your O2 sensor items there. O2 sensor, O2 heater, O2 volts. Okay, yep. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to look up and see which oxygen sensors that's referring to. And we'll keep an eyeball on that. And if that continues, then like I said, we'll make another video coming back and troubleshoot that. But I will let the tuner know, just in case it's something that he has to adjust in the tune, because you remember when we did the kit, he did state that we may need to get larger fuel injectors or an additional fuel pump. So not having enough fuel in the system, you would definitely, you know, end us being ending up with a lean code. But let's see. Well, other than that, I'm going to cut the video at this point just so it doesn't get too terribly long, but because it's already long enough as it is. But as you can see, we're running, and I'm not seeing any leaks, which is good. Starts up just fine. Like I said, we'll look into these fuel system lean codes more than likely in another video, but we made a pretty significant milestone here. And like I said, I'll cut this video at this point, and I'll bring you back for some additional items on this truck, as well as some other items that we've got pending in the future. I want to say thank you for following along as we've been documenting all this. And you may have noticed on some of the current videos, I've started putting the subscribe link at the very end. Now, I'm not going to be one of those YouTube creators that ask you at the start of every video to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm not going to do that. But the goal of this channel is to try to hit that first milestone, which is 1,000 subscribers. According to the analytics, it looks like about 83% of the views that I get are all from unsubscribed individuals. So what we would like to do is get that up to 1,000 so we can continue to progress and grow the channel, because as the channel grows and progresses, and it allows us to do more things like this, it allows us to start to vary things. You know, maybe rather than working on a 2600, then we could potentially go and work on a 1500, maybe take a 5.7 and do similar upgrades to that. So like I said, it'll be at the end of the video. I'm only asking at the end of this video, if you made it this far and you find the information useful, or you like the content, please, by all means, if you don't mind, click the subscribe button. You don't have to. I'm not saying that you have to. I'm going to upload content, but again, as the channel progresses, and it kind of helps us out as well. I'm also going to put links to 2 other individuals' channels out there up in the screen. You'll see them in the boxes, in the square boxes. The round box will be with the channel logo, will be the subscribe area. The 2 square boxes will be to Scott Rod's, and the other square box will be to Tulo's Garage. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Turlo, I'm sorry, I think it's Turlo. Again, I'm butchering it, I apologize. He, last time I checked, was right on that cusp of 1,000 viewers. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of going out and checking out both him and Scott Rod's channel. And if you're not already a subscriber, then please do click subscribe. You'll love them both. They've both done Hemi work. Scott is in the process of has not only 1 hot rod built, but he's currently in the process of building another hot rod. Puts out amazing content, amazing fabricator. Much more fabrication skills than I'll ever have in my lifetime. But that's it. That's enough rambling. I'm gonna cut the video at this point. I got several pieces to put together, and like I said, I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much.